writing phase. And for you, you write for the screen with Winona Earp. And now with Tales from Purgatory, it is your first foray into writing for audio. How did that change your approach to writing?
It was terrifying, but in a good way. Yeah, I'll be honest, like one of the things that forces you to get really creative when you're writing for the screen is you have to be very aware of budget and location and what have you. So to take sort of a beloved TV show and be able to do it in this new medium, we were really able to tell stories in a new environment, on a plane, on an old-timey Western train with a giant, spoiler alert. So just do things that we always wanted to do and talked about in the writing room, but maybe weren't able to with this new soundscape. So it was incredibly freeing and kind of helped us reinvent beloved characters and sort of dive in a way we hadn't been able to before on screen. So it was wonderful.
Was the train something like a something you've always wanted to do, or?
Well, Winona Earp obviously is like the descendant of Wyatt Earp, so there's a very like, you know, big contingent of Old West kind of lore that comes with it. So just being able to go back in time and kind of look back at her famous ancestors' history was great. We could afford a train whistle. That was my thing. That was amazing. And I'm spoiled for whistles when it comes to whistles. Thank you, Audible. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about some of the authors. John, we can go down the line with the authors with this one as well, but you're an author whose work has been brought over to audio. So what are you considering when you're writing for audio, and how does that differ from writing for the page?
Dialogue tags. No, this is no joke. When I started writing novels, I would have he said, or she said, or he said, or she said at the end of every sentence of dialogue. And when you're reading it, that's perfectly fine because your brain will automatically skip over it, right? It's just directing traffic. But the funny thing about the contracts for audio is that they are required. Every single word has to be in the audio version. So I was listening to Red Shirts, which was done by Will, and he did a wonderful job. But literally every line was he said, she said, he said. I'm like, who is this terrible author? Who is this terrible author who is doing that? And so one of the things that I learned that you have to do for audio is the things that you think are necessary in print are not necessarily the things that are necessary in audio. So I have since literally Red Shirts drastically cut back my audio tags or have changed them up because in audio it makes such a difference to the reading experience. Now the irony is that because I started doing that, I have become a better author, so thank you Audible for that. But it is one of those things that you are aware in a way that you're not when you're just writing for the page, that someone is speaking your words, and that awareness that someone is actually, it's going to come out of their mouth and into someone's ears means that you are much more attentive to things like flow, that the dialogue works, that there is a differentiation between how people speak, because that will help the narrator. And occasionally, you get to mess with the narrator. There's a book that I do that is called the Human Division, where there is a character whose name is because I wanted my narrator to do that.
As someone who both narrates and writes, I can confirm that your narrator hates you.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Because my narrator hates me, and I am my own narrator. But on the writing front, the biggest thing for me is transitions. On the page, you can indicate a transition by just a hashtag, a line break. And in audio, if that transition is not clear, the narrator has to work so hard to make it clear and to help the reader reorient. And that often, it's just, like I'm narrating someone else's work, I'm like, whoa, I don't know what's happening right now. Or I'm listening to something, I think, this was written for the page. So transitions for me, and then accidental repetitions, where, because we are drawn to repetitive sounds, that's a very useful thing to us. It gives us information, dripping water, predator footfalls. But when they're accidental, they can become distracting. And then the last one that I think about very heavily are homophones, because when I am narrating somebody else's book and I hit a homophone that I cannot fix, here's an example that I had to narrate in somebody else's book and I could not fix it for them. The word copse, C-O-P-S-E, is a grove of trees. She ran from the police into the copse.
That's awesome. I love that.
I did not.
Oh, my turn. Well, I came at it a little differently because by the time I started writing, I mean, when my first books came out, audio, they would have been fighting between 8-track and cassette. So it wasn't that popular back then. But so by the time everything went over to Audible, they had about 20 books of mine that were already done. And for me, I haven't really made that transition in my mind. I remember when we were on the panel a few years ago here, you had mentioned that about he said, she said, and that's when I first realized, you mean they have to read every word?
Surprise!
You know, what you're taught in snotty English courses is that the road to hell is paved with adverbs, and good dialogue doesn't need attrition. And the reason is, you know, they should know who's talking by the story. And, well, they should know if they're saying something sarcastically, of course they are. And so I tried to adhere to that a little bit in my earlier books, but then as I went along, and this is the whole evolution, Audible's just the next step in the evolution of communication for novels, of the novel format, right? What I started realizing probably around the turn of the century was that if I didn't do attribution to dialogue and I had more than 2 people talking, I was losing readers. And if I didn't use adverbs, they weren't getting it. And I'm like, I don't understand this. But then I figured it out, is that back when message boards were huge, before social media dominated, everything has attribution. And emojis are adverbs. And so we kind of de-sophisticated the reader with the internet. And that's not a pejorative. And I'm not putting it down. It's just people taking communication differently. So for me, here I have 20 books with Audible, and you know, I did an Audible exclusive novella a few years ago, and I'm thinking, do I change the way I write this? Do I give Victor Bavine a break and take out the he said, she said? So I'm like, but then what about the people who have been in this series since they were in high school or junior high, and they're now in the middle-aged? So I really did not change much. I kind of went a little bit back to the earlier Bob and a little less attribution, but I didn't make that change because so much of my work predated it.
Amazing. Dennis, how about you? What are your considerations when you're writing for audio versus writing for the page?
Well, I'm very lucky because I'm a Johnny-come-lately. When I started writing, Audible was already a thing, and my first book went to Audible. So I didn't.
You get closer to the mic also.
Sure.
Thank you.
So I didn't have the conversion issues, and I didn't have the he said, she said issues because I already knew that was a thing. I also had Ray to make sure that my characters were distinct. In the printed version of the books, Guppy has square brackets around everything he says. In the audio version of the books, there is no question that you're listening to Guppy. Thank you. And when I do multiple individuals speaking, I can tag them, with word tags, and Ray will know who's talking, and he just takes care of making sure that the voices are different. So for me, It's a no-brainer.
Shut up.
Fighting words.
He takes my name and then we have to deal with this too.
Yeah, I know. What are you even?
The legal problems with the Bob is coming.
Yeah, royalties.
Ray, as a narrator, your job is to convey the author's work through your performance and your voice. What is the initial collaborative process between an author, and especially with Dennis, before stepping into the recording booth?
Well, I think it's going to be very different from author to author and from narrator to narrator. Sometimes, I'll get notes from an author or whatever, but oftentimes you don't actually get the privilege of meeting the author until after the fact. And so it's a little bit like a blind date. You finish the book hoping that the author is pleased with how you brought their work to sound. But you never really know, until you find out. So I've not done a great deal in the way of collaborative stuff. Sometimes there'll be a pronunciation list, which is helpful if in the author's mind, the name of a character looks like Pete, but it actually is, maybe let me know. So a lot of it is, basically when I go into a book, my only information is the book. And so I have really worked very hard to try to figure out what each book's voice is, because every book does have a unique voice. And just try to stay out of the way between the author and you who are listening to it, and just steer a little bit. But that's about it. Now, obviously, there are some things like, Cops, where the steering wheel falls off in your hands, and you do your best. And I have noticed a kind of a fall off in the he said, she said, and adverbs and that kind of thing, because it's a little bit like cowbell. A little bit goes a long way. For me, really, every book is just, okay, what are you trying to tell me? What are you trying to tell me that I can tell the people who are listening to the book? And that's about that. Then I get to meet the authors later, and it's wonderful.
I bet. Going down the line again, John. Yep, you're up, buddy. Your work has been narrated by various and notable performers, including Will Wheaton and Zachary Quinto, most recently Amber Benson for constituent service. How do the different narrators, the various styles and voices, how do those contribute towards your work?
Well, I think it makes a huge difference. So, for example, Will is, we grew up in the same area, we're about the same age. We're super nerds. And he's a friend of mine. So literally, to go back to what was being said earlier, it's like anytime that he has a question, he'll just literally text me, right? Like, dude, do you really want this pronounced this way? I'm like, yes, you have to say it exactly that way. And so we have that good relationship. But the other thing is that I kind of knew before the dispatcher was completely done that Zachary Quinto was the voice that they had chosen for it. And so in many ways, and I'm of course very used to him from Star Trek and from Heroes, and that had some influence on how I was writing the text, because I knew he was going to deliver it. The same with Amber Benson, who had done work with in Lock-In and Head On before, and knowing, and again, she and I are also friends, so knowing that she was the narrator that they had chosen for constituent service well before I started writing it, because I'm incredibly lazy and waited until the last minute, meant that I could hear her voice in my head, and it made a material difference in primarily the main character, because I didn't know how she was going to voice all the aliens. And that was sort of comforting. Like, I felt reassured that no matter what I wrote, that a professional like Amber or Zachary or Will, or even Mary Robinette, who has narrated me in the past, was going to do a good job of it. And then the occasional, antagonizing the narrator's side, you want that partnership to work. You want to make it easy for the narrator to sell it to the readers. So having those folks in mind has made a huge difference for me.
I love that you're thinking of your narrators while you're writing too. And this makes me wonder, Mary Robinette, you are a writer and a narrator of your work. The way I imagine you is you're furiously typing on a typewriter and you're narrating all of the voices while you are writing, but what is the actual process like for you, and does the performance ever inform your work or vice versa, or not at all?
So interesting. We talk about the writer Mary Robinette and the narrator Mary Robinette, and the narrator Mary Robinette really does hate the writer Mary Robinette, because with the Lady Astronaut books, it's an international organization. The International Aerospace Coalition goes into space, and so I wanted to represent all of those people, and I put in a bunch of languages I don't speak. Big, long sentences. Sure, yeah, I totally know how to speak Croatian. It's 100% a thing that I can do. No. So I will just write it the way the story needs to be written. And then I will trust that my narrator will figure it out. And I say that because, you know, I've had other people narrate my stuff as well, and I've had to narrate other people's stuff as well, and I know that that's the job. The job is to figure it out. And I also have a really good engineer who is willing to let me take as many takes as I need to in order to get it to sound passable. And then he speeds it up a little bit so I sound fluent. So it did mean that in this latest book, I did have a section where I had originally a whole bunch of not English. And I was like, hang on, you know you're gonna have to narrate this. Does that actually need to be in there? Can we just say, since Elma doesn't speak this language, should we just say, and then they said some things that I didn't understand. So I did.
Well done.
I think the dichotomy that you face between one side hating the other, I think we all feel that with ourselves.
Yeah.
Bob, the Legend of Earth series, part of the extremely cringy pun, but it is legendary. You've been writing it since the late 80s. There's what, 40 books now? Close to 40 books?
39.
39, that's 40.
Well, if you count the cleric books and the Stone of Tomorrow young adult books and the anthology, there's a lot.
And specifically the Audible original, like the collected stories, boasts a star-studded cast. Oh my goodness.
I was going to tell that story, yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Sean Astin, Felicia Day, friend of the show, Ice-T, Weird Al, and so many more. For you, what did the different voices and performances styles bring to the table when presenting your work that already had such a beloved following?
Okay, I have to set this up. I was sitting there typing, and my wife comes in and she says, hey, look at this. And she hands me this blog that somebody had written, saying, I wanted to read a book, and it's got this flying horses and talking swords, and what is this? And a bunch of swears. I won't do it here. And I'm like, that's my story. And so I called Wizards, I think I called Wizards, I might have called Steve over at Audible. I'm like, what the hell is this? That's my story. It was Ice-T's blog, by the way. And, oh, we wanted to surprise you. We're doing this collection, and that's when I found out. And I'm like, what? And then they're reading the names, and David Duchovny, and Weird Al, and Ice-T, and I think that the experience, like, I was supposed to go to Ice-T's house to do his podcast, but I had an appointment with TSA that I couldn't get out of, that I had spent a year getting. So I found myself walking from Logan Airport to Fenway Park in Boston on the phone with Ice-T, doing his podcast. And the first thing he said to me goes, can you really pronounce these names? And I said, but it's not how he said it. It's more colorful than that. And I said, of course not. I love you, I love you. And we became great friends on Twitter and stuff after that, but it was amazing to me to listen to like Felicia Day and Dora Dwarfs. And I think she did Bones and Stones, which was really going for me. But you watch it come to life, and I feel the same way I feel about the artists that do the covers, right? It's like, I don't want to crimp that. I'm a writer. What talent I have is writing. I'm not doubly talented. And I quickly came to learn with Victor, who does all the Dritz books pretty much, Victor Bavine. I quickly came to learn that the amount of talent that they bring to the table is right there with anything that I'm doing and creating it in the first place. And then just listening to the different voices and seeing people catch it and bringing such different characteristics to the names, to the accents, to whatever. It's like watching 10 different artists paint the cover for your book. And I love that. And I love that. And you know, I can't draw a stick man, so when Larry Elmore does a cover, Keith Parkinson does a cover, and Todd Lockwood does a cover for me, it's like, I almost feel like if I inspired this person to do this, I feel the same about the narrators, then I must have done something okay, because this is really cool. That's how I felt about that, but that was the biggest shock. I had no idea they were doing that.
I hope you told TSA the full story, by the way.
What's that?
I hope you told TSA the full story of you walking over.
Oh no, I just wanted to get my card and get out of there.
All right, well, Emily, Wynonna Earp, of course, is a passionate audience, those of you who's grown with the show, and with Tales from Purgatory, it includes most of the original cast, which is so exciting for fans. Did the evolution from screen to audio change the way you see your work? And did any of your cast members surprise you in the way that you only heard their voices this time around?
I mean, very much. I mean, I was really intimidated from going from screen to audio, to be honest. I mean, I cannot lie. If you've seen my cast, they're extremely attractive, and that's a huge crush. Who knows what they're even saying? You're just staring into their eyes. So taking that tool away from them and from me was tricky, but it did force me to kind of dig down in different ways. It was funny, I was most intimidated, I would say, about how to convey the action, because we're very lazy in TV. You can just watch people karate chop each other and you get it. But in audio, you have to figure out a way to like describe the action and in a way that isn't just like pure exposition. So, you know, that did kind of forced me to go back to my roots of writing. But what surprised me the most was how much the characters and the cast were able to kind of expand on the emotions of these characters we already loved, to be honest. One of our most beloved cast members, Tim Rozon, actually wrote one of the episodes, which was wonderful. And you know, we still, thanks to Audible, put the whole cast in the same room when they were recording, and that was such a boon to the emotion and the spirit of it, I think, just that they could still look into each other's eyes and perform almost like a play. I think you can really hear the results, and it was just so rich. But I absolutely loved it. It just allowed me to tell stories again that I would never be able to on the screen and really do so much character work. That was such a blessing after almost 8 years of doing Earth, so it was great.
To see that evolution. Dennis, you know, we've heard from your narrator about the collaborative process and you know, being able to meet after narrating your work, but take us back to the first time you were able to hear your work from Ray. And as the journey has continued, book 5, of course, released last month on Audible, was there ever a moment his performance shifted your writing, or even a plot point at some point?
Sorry,
There's 2 questions in that. Sorry. Take us back to the first moment, and then did it ever change things?
Well, the whole experience was absolutely hallucinatory from the get-go. I mean, I fell into writing. I never really intended to become an author. So I produced this book. I suddenly find myself with an agent. I suddenly find myself with a producer. And I suddenly find myself with a narrator. And the next thing I know, the book is on Audible. And when I listened to it, it was almost like I couldn't recognize the writing as my own. It was like somebody else had done this. And it was a story very similar to a story that I'd written. and it was great. And it's never been any other way for me. That's the thing. Now, there is one point that I think I would like to bring up, and it was a revelatory moment, not for me necessarily, but for my wife. We were driving back from holiday somewhere in BC, and Singularity Trap had just come out, and we were playing it on the, we were playing the book on the stereo, and Wahine started to cry. And it was the first time she'd ever really listened to my books and realized what I was doing. And, what Ray had done with them, and that, yeah, the guy's an author.